Hello, I'm Marion. I'm really happy to be part of the Climate Change Festival, and today I'm bringing you some scary stories for brave people. And the first one happens on a hill with some trees on top. I wonder if you've ever been all on your own among some trees, maybe in a wood, even just for a minute. And have you ever had that feeling that you're the only person in the world and this whole gorgeous place belongs to you? And sometimes there'll be just a breath of wind, or maybe there'll be a cloud going over the sun, and suddenly, just for a minute, those trees don't look so friendly. You think, maybe it doesn't belong to me. Maybe I belong to it. Well, Three Tree Hill was a wild place, a bit like that. It stuck up in the middle of the farmland all around it, and right on the top of it, there were three huge beech trees with great, tall, smooth trunks, and the canopy, the leaves and the branches on top. When the sun shone through them in the early morning, they looked like gold and emeralds, like queen's crowns. And the people around there, they loved that hill, but they were a bit afraid of it. They told stories about it. They said that on Midsummer Night, the three green ladies would come out of the trees and dance on the top of the hill. But it wasn't a good idea to go and see them because you never knew what they'd do. And they used to bring presents to the trees. Now that sounds weird, but you want the trees to be on your side. So on May morning, they go out looking for those primroses, those little magical flowers that suddenly spring up from nowhere and look like pale yellow coins scattered around on the ground. And they take little bunches of them as presents for the trees. And the old farmer, well, he didn't talk much about the trees, but people knew that he went up to see those three green ladies now and then. And his was always the first and the biggest bunch of primroses left on May Day. Well, time passed. The old farmer died and his three sons inherited the farm. And the first, the oldest, he got the best and the biggest bit of farmland. And he ploughed it all up, he dug up the hedgerows, he filled in the ditches, he sowed every inch of it with as much barley as he could manage. Second, he was the one that gone to the city and learnt all about money. And he appointed a manager and he said, I don't care what you do with this farm as long as you send me money every month. And the third son, the youngest son, the one who'd stayed at home, well, he had the smallest bit tucked round the back on the north-facing side of the hill, and he looked after it in the old way. And he carefully tilled the ground, he fed the ground, he put compost back into it. He talked to his sheep and he clucked to his hens when he picked up the eggs, and he went to see the green ladies on Three Tree Hill. And he always took him a little something. And you know, his was the farm that flourished. His barley swelled and grew riper and richer than anyone else's. He had finer wool in his sheep. I'm going to do that bit again because of it. And you know, his farm did better than anyone else's. His barley swelled, his sheep had finer hides at shearing time, and the hens gave more eggs. This annoyed his brothers no end. So, on May Day morning, the older brother stopped always traffic.
Yeah. So the older go with the older brother, stop. Yeah.
And so, on May Day morning, the older brother stopped his youngest brother coming down Three Tree Hill. And he said, "That's on my land, that hill. What are you doing on it? You're trespassing." And the younger brother said, "Well, I go and see the three green ladies when I need to, just like I always have. And no one's going to stop me." "Oh, yes," said the brother. "I will stop you because I'm going to have those trees for firewood. They're my trees and I can cut them down if I like. And that's just what I'm going to do." And he was as good as his word. The next morning he gathered his farm hands and he said, "Forget the jobs you were planning to do today. We're going to chop down the beech trees on Three Tree Hill." Now, the farm workers, they were all local men. They'd grown up in sight of Three Tree Hill. And they said, "What? Cut down the three ladies? You must be joking, we're not doing that." And they put down their tools and they walked away from the farm. Well, the older brother was spitting mad now. He said, "Well, if they won't help me, I'll do it on my own." And he went to the shed and he got his axe. He climbed up that hill in a right old temper. And he set about raining blows on that tree trunk of the first tree. And at the first blow, the whole tree shook and shivered. And there was a sound like a moan or a cry came from the tree. And green sap dripped out of the cut. And although he knew it was sap, it looked sticky, like green blood. But older brother, he didn't care about that. He carried on hacking and cutting until the whole tree started to shake and quiver, and it began to fall, but at the last moment, it twisted round. It fell the other way, right on top of older brother, and that was the end of him. Well, they cleared away the body of the tree, and they buried the body of the man. And now there were only 2 green ladies on Three Tree Hill. And the second brother, he inherited his brother's farm, and he put the manager in charge of that, and he said, "I don't care what you do, get as much money out of this land as you can." But do you know what? The soil in those 2 farms had grown thin, and the crop was poor. But younger brother's farm, it flourished. And on May morning the next year, younger brother went back up to take primroses to the 2 trees left on the hill. And second brother, he was so angry, he too shouted at youngest brother. He too said, "I am going to chop down the trees on Three Tree Hill." Second brother was a bit cleverer than his older brother, and he rigged up that tree with ropes and tackles so that when it fell, he could make sure it fell right away from him. And he too shook and hacked at that tree, and the tree sobbed and cried, but it too was cut down. And second brother, he stood and looked at it. Now there was only 1 tree on Three Tree Hill, and that tree shook even though there was no wind. It shook and swayed, and suddenly a branch fell with a great crash right on top of second brother. That was the end of him. Well, they cleared away the body of the tree and they buried the body of the man. And now youngest brother, he inherited the hill and all 3 farms. And he started taking care of that land and feeding it and planting the hedges back to protect the soil. And he went up to the last tree on Three Tree Hill that autumn, And he found it had been a fine year for seeds, and he gathered up all the beech mast, the little beech nuts, and he planted them all over the hill. And now that hill is covered with beech trees, but still at the top there is one tree bigger than all the rest, and one green lady dances on Beech Tree Hill. And that's the end of that story. The world will look after us if we look after it. My next story is a very old story, and it comes from the fenlands round here. And it begins a long time ago in an old fenland village. And in that village, outside the oldest, most tumble-down house, there was an old rocking chair. And on sunny days, that's where old Grandma Chapman sat. And if the children of the village didn't have anything particular to do, why, they'd fetch up by that old rocking chair, because Grandma Chapman, she told the scariest stories. She told them stories about bogles and boggarts and all the creeping, nameless things that live in the fenland. She told them stories about witches and ghosts and Black Shuck with the red eyes who howls at midnight full moon. But the story they always asked her to tell most was the story of the Tiddy Mun, because that was Grandma Chapman's own story. When Grandma Chapman had been a young girl, not Grandma Chapman, but young Charlotte, the fens weren't like they are today. They weren't flat and empty lands stretching as far as the eye can see, no. They were a place of boggy marshes, tall reeds, and little paths where, if you put your foot wrong, you would be sucked down into the mud. But young Charlotte, she knew those paths like the back of her hand, and she'd go in and out all day long. And she had a favourite place, which was by a pool, deep in the reeds. And she'd sit on an old willow snag, that's a dead tree, and she'd sit on its black roots with its dead branches sticking up behind her like a dead black hand. And all around her the reeds would be whispering and chattering and murmuring as if they were talking about her. And she'd look at that murky, muddy pool and wonder what was at the bottom. And one day, while she was sitting by that pool, there was a little ripple came up to the surface like a fish breaking the water, and another. Then a head came out of the water. It was like a human head, but it was really small, like it was a baby's head. And the head turned towards her, and the face, it was no bigger than a baby's face, but it was all wrinkled with grey, wispy, straggly hair. And that creature looked at her with piercing blue eyes. And then it turned and it went to the far side of the pool, and it climbed up on the bank. She could see it had a long grey, wispy beard. And it was dressed on, was it covered in mist or was it rags of grey? And she watched it go out of the pool and along the path, limping along, libblety-lobblety. Just as it went out of sight, she heard it make a noise. Bee-wit, bee-wit. Just like the lapwing, or the peewit, as the fenfolk call it, that makes its nest on the ground among the reeds and the marshes. Well, what would you do if you saw such a strange creature as that in the fens? I'll tell you what Charlotte did. She went running all the way back down the path, all the way back home, all the way, shut the door behind her, to find her mum. And there was her mum peeling the potatoes. And she told her mum all about the strange creature she'd seen in the pond, and her mum didn't even look up from the potatoes. She said, "Ah, you've seen the Tiddy Mun then?" Tiddy Mun? What was that? And Tiddy's an old word that means little, and Mun is man, so Tiddy Mun, little man. What little man? But that evening, just as it was getting so dark that you couldn't tell what was out beyond the garden gate, Charlotte's mother, she reached up, she got 2 old stone bottles from the shelf. And she went out in the dark to the pump behind the house, and she pumped up some cool, fresh water and filled those bottles. And she gave one of them to Charlotte, and she said, "Well, if you've seen the Tiddy Mun, you'd best come with me tonight." And so Charlotte followed her mum, and off they set. Out down that same fenland path that Charlotte knew so well in the daytime, but it was a bit different at night. It was full of dark shadows and strange noises, and she could see people flitting ahead of her and shadows behind her as well. And at last they came to that pool. Charlotte could see that those shadows behind and in front, they were the other people in the village. And they all stood round the pool. Charlotte's mother stepped forward and called out, "Hey, Tiddy Mun! Tiddy Mun without a name, always halting, always lame. While the water teems the fen, Tiddy Mun'll do none harm. Tiddy Mun, here's water for 'ee." And she took a bottle and she poured that fresh, clean water into the muddy water of the pool. And so did Charlotte. And so did all the other villagers. And you know, Tiddy Mun did look after them. When the water rose and flooded their house, Charlotte's mother walked outside with her skirts hitched up to her knees and called out, "Hey, Tiddy Mun, the water's up." And you know, by evening, that water had gone and the straw mat on their floor was bone dry. Time passed. Grandma Chapman, she grew up. She became Mother Chapman, Grandmother Chapman. And times changed. The Dutchman came to drain the fens, to pump out all those marshes and the boggy water and reclaim the black, rich fen soil. And Tiddy Mun didn't really hold to that. Sometimes he'd hear a splash and a shout, and there'd be one fewer of the Dutchmen in the pub that night. And the old men would shake their heads and say, "Oh, Tiddy Mun's not pleased. Better not to meddle. Bad's bad, but meddling only makes it worse." But there were more Dutchmen to take the place of the ones who disappeared, and soon the whole fen was drained and empty. Life was different. People forgot about Tiddy Mun. And things went badly. Things went wrong. Things went arsey-versey in the fens. The houses crumbled, the walls fell out and the roofs fell in. The horses got lame and the pigs got sick and the people got strange illnesses. And when Grandma Chapman's own grandchild, when she saw her lying there sick and listless, she knew it was time to do something. So she went round all the villagers and she said to them, "Tiddy Mun's angry with us. We've forgotten the old ways. Bring your bottle of water to the fens tonight." And so they did, but there were no fens. So they went to the little pond at the end of the village, which was the same pond that had been in the middle of the fens when Grandma Chapman was young. And they got their bottles of water and they poured them in the muddy pond. And Grandma Chapman called out, Tiddy Mun, Tiddy Mun, don't be angry with us. And they listened, and they waited. And then suddenly they heard, "Pee-wit, pee-wit," a sound like a lapwing cry. And they knew that Tiddy Mun was on their side. And at this point in the story, Grandma Chapman always went very quiet. And eventually one of the children would always ask the same question. "Grandma Chapman, will we ever see Tiddy Mun?" And Grandma Chapman, she always shook her head. "Ah, no. Tiddy Mun's long gone." But you know, if you ever find a bit of fenland, a place where there's a muddy pond and reeds tall and rustling, and if you sit there very quiet, far from the people and the traffic, you just might see a ripple in the water, and you might hear the cry, "Pee-wit, pee-wit." And that's the story of the Tiddy Mun. This last story, you might not think it's very scary, but wait till the end. It's about a cat. There was once an old woman who lived in a cottage, all on her own except for her cat. And that cat was a black cat with red eyes, and all the neighbours said, "Watch out for that cat." But did the old woman listen? No, she did not. One morning she woke up and she put the oats and the water in the pot and put the pot on the fire to boil for her porridge. And while it was boiling, she thought to herself, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice to have some honey on my porridge?" So she went off down the bottom of the garden to talk to the bees to see if they'd give her some honey. But as she went, she said to the little cat, "Watch the porridge for me, little cat. Make sure nobody touches it." The moment she was out the door, the cat went creeping towards the porridge pot and dipped a paw in and tried it. And again, and again. And that cat, it ate all the porridge in the pot. When it checked that no one was looking, it picked up the pot and it swallowed down the pot in one gulp. Well, when the old woman got back, the first thing she saw was her cat curled up on the front of the fire with a huge, great, swollen belly. And she said, "My little cat, why are you so fat?" And the cat said, "I ate the porridge and the pot, and now I'm going to eat you." And he gulped down the old woman in one gulp. And then he looked round with his red eyes to see what else there was to eat in the house. He couldn't see much, so he went out of the door and he walked down the street. And the first person he met was Hottentot. And Hottentot is very tall and skinny and clever. And Hottentot said, "Oh, my little cat, why are you so fat?" And the cat looked at him with its red eyes and said, "I ate the porridge and the pot and the old woman, and now I'm going to eat you." And with one gulp, he ate Hottentot. And on he went down the street until he met Lincoln-Lot. And she is very wide and jolly, and she said, "Oh, my little cat, why are you so fat?" "I ate the porridge and the pot and the old woman and Hottentot, and I'm going to eat you." Oh! And the cat gulped down Lincoln-Lot. And the cat walked on down the road till he came to the farm, and outside the hen house were 5 chickens, all clucking and squabbling and scratching, and they all stopped when they saw the cat, and they all said, "Oh, my little cat, why are you so fat?" I ate the porridge and the pot, the old woman and sco Hottentot, sco Lincoln lot, and I'm going to eat you. And oop, that cat ate all 5 chickens in one gulp. And so the cat walked on down the road past a field of cows, 7 cows. And the 7 cows all looked at the cat and said, "Oh, my little cat, why are you so fat?" And the cat said, "I ate the porridge and the pot, and the old woman and sco Hottentot, sco Lincoln lot, and the 5 chickens in a flock, and I'm going to eat you." And that cat, you will not believe this, that cat gulped down 7 cows. And on walked the cat till he got to the river. And there by the river there were 3 boys playing, and their names were Lachlan, Senan and Emmet. And do you know what? They picked up 3 long swan feathers and they were playing with those. But they looked round when they saw the cat and they said, "Oh, my little cat, why are you so fat?" And the cat said, "I ate the porridge and the pot and the old woman and sco Hottentot and sco Lincoln lot and the 5 chickens in a flock and the 7 cows, and now I'm going to eat you." But those 3 boys said, "Oh, no, you're not." And they got out their feathers and they started to tickle that cat. And they tickled and tickled and tickled the cat until the cat went, chew. And the cat sneezed out the 7 cows and the 5 chickens and sco Lincoln lot and sco Hottentot, the old woman and the porridge and the pot. And the old woman, she picked up the pot and she invited everyone back for breakfast. And everybody had a bowl of porridge, except for the little cat. You might not think that's a very scary story, but in fact, in our world, people have been behaving a bit like that cat. People have been eating and consuming everything and destroying landscape and environment. And the whole world might get used up if people were to carry on like that. But luckily, in our world we have children, just like the children in our story, who can say, "No, stop, no more eating too much." And you children of the world, you are the people who are going to stop the eating happening. And we old people, well, we'll help you just the best we can. Thank you for listening to the stories. You might not think that story's very scary, but what if I told you that in our world people have been behaving a bit like that cat? They've been consuming, eating everything, the food, the land, the environment. And if people go on like that, our world could get used up. But luckily, in our world, we have children, like the children in the story, children like you, children who will say, "No, stop, no more eating too much." We have children who will make sure we take just enough and that there's enough to share. And we old people, well, we will help you the best we can. Thank you for listening to my stories.